Welcome back, everybody, once again to Thursday's Theology. We are in our third episode of Christ and Quarantine, and today I am super blessed and excited to welcome my really good friend, TJ de la Garza. I met
Hello.
TJ in seminary, and I remember I did most of my seminary education online, so there was this weird dynamic of online courses, and I had to do a couple of hybrid courses where I had to show up in person for a week. And TJ was one of the first people I met in one of those in-person classes, and immediately from the first moment I met him, I'm just like, this is a good guy. So TJ, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And I think we were in a formation class together too, right? A part of that class?
Yep.
Or that hybrid class. So it was
Yep.
One of 6 guys.
Yep.
Loved it, man. Appreciated having you. Thank you for having me on. Hello to everybody that subscribes to Thursday's Theology.
So TJ, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you serve, how long you've been there, what you do, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely, man. I'll tell you about myself, and if there's anything I'm missing, please let me know. So, my name's TJ de la Garza. I am a 40-year-old family ministries pastor right outside of Dallas, Texas. The town I serve in is called Duncanville. In fact, you go right from Dallas city limits into Duncanville city limits. And I'm the family ministries pastor at a church called Crossroads of Life. It's an Assembly of God church. And we're just in a very unique area. 7 miles to the east of us is Tony Evans Church. 7 miles the opposite way on the same freeway going west is TD Jakes' church. And a lot of mega churches around us, a lot of really great ministries, which is both great and benefiting and frustrating at the same time. Yeah. And our community is what sociologists I've heard are starting to call exurbs right now, which were the new suburban movement in the late 80s, early 90s. And now just over years, white flight has happened. People with money move further south. And now those traditionally impoverished Hispanic, African-American, Black families moved into those old homes. So it's not completely urban. We're not completely suburban. We're kind of a mixture of both. So, and I'm been married to my wife 22 years this year. We got married right out of high school and had kids really young. So I have a son who is starting his 3rd year of Bible college in the next few weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, he's actually there now because he was chosen this year to be a resident advisor in a dorm. So they got to do 3 years of training, and he's studying after 2 years of being in Bible college, studying music and worship. He touched my heart and said he's changing to religion and philosophy. So he's currently studying religion and philosophy, and I love it. And then our daughter, who's 19, is actually going to start her 1st year of college this year, but she's staying at home and going to a community college, and then wants to travel over to that Bible college.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. I did community college. It's great.
Yeah. Been at our church and in Texas since 2008. Prior to that, we served at a church north of Seattle. And then prior to that, in Southern California, I was born and raised in the agricultural fields of in Fresno of the Central Valley.
Nice.
So it's kind of me in a nutshell.
So Fresno, Seattle, and Dallas are very different geographical locations.
Yeah, Fresno, I worked at a church in the Imperial Valley for 2 years, so 12 miles north of Mexicali, Mexico. Okay. And then from there, we moved to Seattle and then to Texas. So we've been around a bit.
So I have to ask then, since you've lived in Southern California, the Pacific Northwest, and Texas, where do your allegiances lie for sports?
It depends on who's winning.
So we can rule out the Mariners. We can rule out the Padres.
Yes. So you always root for the home team, man. And we've lived here since 2008, right when our son was being awakened to the beauty of sports and the camaraderie of it. So for the last 12, 13 years of him rooting for the Mavericks, for the Dallas Mavericks, for the Texas Rangers, for the Cowboys, that's probably right now where my allegiances lie. But growing up, I was a Lakers fan. I have a soft spot in my heart for them still. Sure. And then I think just being in Texas and the roller coaster, being in the World Series back to back for 2 years and being disappointed, which is really weird because growing up, I was a San Francisco Giants fan. And so I was glad when they won the World Series, but disappointed. And then 2011, when the Mavs took out the Lakers in a sweep and then defeated the Miami Heat and game 2 where they came back from 15 points in 5 minutes, you got to be a Mavs fan, man.
Yeah, yeah. And I would assume, just because of my own experience with Dallas Cowboys fans, it would almost be a detriment to your ministry if you weren't a Cowboys fan.
Oh, for sure, man. I tell you what, football, all the cliches and stereotypes about football in the rural areas and in the urban areas is real. In fact, yeah, Duncanville, the city we live in, just went to back-to-back state championships and lost both of them. Our youth pastor actually baptized 36 football players last Christmas.
Wow.
Right. He's the chaplain of the football team. And so it's really amazing. The town south of us, Cedar Hill, has won 3 championships in the last 10 years. The town to the east of us, DeSoto, won a championship about 3 years ago.
Jeez.
And so, yeah. And,
Yeah. And I've heard
we've
that
seen,
that's the case with Texas. Just football,
that's it.
even down
That's
to
it.
the Pee Wee level, is just on another level.
Yeah. Man, I've seen Emmitt Smith in our Costco. I've seen Tim Brown in our Costco. I've seen Des Bryant in our Costco. That's right across the street from the church. So, in fact, Tim Brown is a youth pastor at a Kojic church in South Dallas.
Huh.
So,
go figure.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a guy that if you ever need to come speak, he's spoken at my son's Bible college for chapel. And he has a really powerful story about walking into a Magic Johnson party, feeling some stirring and walking out. And then that next week, Magic came out and announced that he was positive.
Whoa.
Yeah, of course, his story, you got to hear his story.
Yeah.
About, just sermons he started hearing again in his head while he's going into this party from his childhood, from his teenage years.
Yeah.
That things he hadn't thought about in a long time. And then he felt like, you got to hear him tell it. He felt like he just heard this voice that said, if you stay, you will never be the same. So he got up and left. And
wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. So
nice. Well, TJ, what we've been focusing on for the past couple episodes is this idea. I'm calling it Christ and quarantine, because we are currently in a season where if we're not, quarantined, we're socially distanced and just trying to navigate that. So the only question I have for you for this episode is, what has Christ been teaching you during quarantine? Like, what's something that you've come to find out about yourself or about God, or what has Christ been teaching you?
Man, so many different things. I feel this was actually a stressful question to answer when you messaged me. And because I think I can separate what has Christ taught me personally, what has Christ taught me occupationally,
Sure.
What has he taught me as a father, what has he taught me as a husband, all those things about myself. But I really honestly think one thing that encompasses and affects all of those areas and spaces is just really practicing and learning how to lament the right way and in an honest way, in a way that is honest with myself, with my wife, even in my prayer life to God. And I jokingly say this. Now, I come from a very holiness Pentecostal tradition that doesn't cuss. And I don't have a problem if somebody does. But I joke with my friends and I say, man, sometimes I don't know if I'm praying in the spirit or if I'm cussing. But those and just and processing and being honest that, man, I'm really dealing with anger right now on so many levels.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID, this has been one of the hardest years of one of my wife's life as a married couple together. There was a lot of things that happened, and if we have time, I'd like to share some a little bit later. But just realizing that, allowing myself to lament for so many different reasons, realizing that this is the first time that I've ever had an elongated season where there seems like there's no end to any numbness and any the triggers for anger and anxiety. And just like, I realized through some of my therapy and counseling sessions that when I get angry, I am not the guy that rages. You see in the movies, guys are throwing things. And I definitely saw that in my household growing up. I never saw people in my household growing up handle conflict well. I saw them fight and argue, but nobody ever handled conflict well. And my household and households growing up were ones where it was the stereotypical objects being thrown at each other, people, hitting each other, police being called. So there was real rage when people became angry in my upbringing. And I always thought that, no, I'm not angry because that doesn't happen to me.
Right.
But I realized that when I get angry, I have this tendency to withdraw and just not care about things.
Interesting.
And when I start getting loud and maybe raising my voice and yelling, I realize that I'm actually frightened in those moments. I'm not angry, you know?
Yeah.
So when me and my wife are having a discussion that leads to a potential argument, and I start raising my voice, I'm not doing it because I'm angry. I thought I was angry.
Yeah.
I felt like I was angry, but I was really afraid,
Mm.
and for so many different reasons.
Yeah.
And when I'm angry, I just have this tendency to not care, which is okay. But I just got to make sure that one of the kind of statements that I've learned through friends and therapy and prayers, you have to name it to tame it.
Yeah.
And so even just being able to admit in my prayer time to my wife when she asks me what's wrong, instead of saying nothing, just say, I just feel sad today.
Yeah.
I I'm angry, and I'm starting not to care. So those are some of the things, and I'm still learning, and I still have this working definition that I'm trying to process.
Yeah.
So I think I'll stop there and let you ask some questions and see if there's a direction you want to go there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think for me, one of the things, I've been in therapy for several years now too, and in fact, I showed you this before we started shooting, but this is my journal that I have, to
Yeah.
that. And I think that there's a kind of a negative stereotype with therapy, especially in faith communities, where I've heard things
Sure.
like, oh, if you're anxious, you just need to pray more, or you just need to have more faith. And yes, prayer and faith do play a role in it, but to negate somebody's anxiety and say like, oh, well, you just don't have enough faith, like that doesn't help.
Yeah.
But for me, like I appreciate your honesty, because like anxiety has been a huge thing for me. And I think that one of the things I've noticed in therapy for myself in my own life is that the way I deal with stress is I try to like distract myself. Like I don't want to sit in pain and the discomfort. I try and like, oh, I'm gonna go do this and just not think about it. Like, but therapy for me has given me a platform to actually understand how I process my emotions and what I need to do to process through them in a healthy way. Because like for me, distracting myself and numbing myself out and not paying attention to how I'm feeling leads to more anxiety. So
Right.
with my issues and be okay, and like you said, name the emotions that I'm feeling, has been a huge thing for me to process through.
Yeah. And in a healthy way. I mean, another thing I've learned from therapy off of what I've learned this through COVID, since we're talking, is, processing things in a healthy way doesn't necessarily mean it's a feel good way for me.
Yeah.
And there are some things that I have to deal with. I tell, and everything you said about the stereotypes, I faced a lot of those pushbacks in every space of my life and my faith community, amongst my family, who's very Hispanic culture. That there's in fact, when my wife decided to go to therapy, I know one of her family members called me, and it was almost like this conversation where they kept. I don't think they knew what they were doing, and this is just how I was receiving it. I don't know if they were doing it, but it was almost like they were trying to talk me out of talking her into going.
Yeah.
And I had to tell them, hey, look, this doesn't scare me. I mean, this doesn't scare her. This is, we don't think anything's, well, there were some things wrong, but it wasn't, wrong just because it was wrong. And then even like you said, anxiety, my wife realizing that all her life she's dealt with anxiety and nobody just ever knew it.
Right.
And then seeing some other family members that have anxiety attacks and just don't tell anybody.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, going back to something you said too about just the idea of taking care of yourself and doing the healthy practice might not be what you want to do, or the best like feel good way. I was just struck
Right, because it's not about feeling good emotionally.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think what the image that popped into my mind right away is that of physical therapy. Like if you injure yourself,
Yes.
you have to like go to physical therapy, and it's not going to be comfortable. Like you're relearning how to use a muscle or a part of your body, and it's going to be sometimes painful, but you have to go
Very.
through that pain to be able to regain the mobility and regain the health of whatever you're trying to target. So I think it
Hmm.
can be a similar metaphor for
Metaphor.
mental health,
Yeah.
you know? So let's talk about this quarantine time, because it's been a very unique time in church history and in our own lives, because nobody wants to be quarantined. I mean, you and I are both involved in church ministry, and church ministry thrives on, you know, in-person meetings
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
personal
Hmm.
relationships and stuff like that. So what's something that you've been learning about how to navigate being a pastor in the midst of quarantine?
Yeah, man. Well, I definitely have learned that pastors thrive off people encouraging them and patting them on the backs,
Mm,
and how to what pastoral leadership could look like and should look like beyond that.
yeah.
And um, man, that's a great question. So I would say definitely learn that structures and systems are not sacred,
Mm,
and the spirit can move in beyond those things.
mm,
And so for us, coming from a Pentecostal background that's very experiential, everything revolves around, and to our detriment, sometimes in our staff meetings post Sunday, we gauge how good a service was by how emotionally charged everybody was. And I love it, man. I love, I'm a experiential guy, and one of my purposes of going to seminary was to bridge theological studies with my Pentecostal tradition and vice versa.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so that was probably really hard for us, and honestly, that limited us and is still limiting us to this day. Of where I would say organizationally, and I would say it if our staff was here, and there'd be a lot of pushback and a lot of different views, but I can
Sure,
only speak from what I observe,
sure.
is we are still hoping to get back to normal soon.
Hmm.
um, Financially, we're super healthy. Our people have had,
That's good.
I've had friends that are youth pastors, kids pastors, associate pastors, that their giving has dropped, so they've had to get part-time jobs.
Yeah, yeah,
One of the beauties of being a part of a holiness tradition is people's practices. Man, they practice, giving. They practice,
yeah,
prayer. They practice trying to hear the voice of God.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so we're navigating through that still. Um, yeah, I just don't know where we're going to end when everything gets back to a new normal. I know we're trying to get back to that, but as far as the things that I am in charge of, that I can direct and dictate, we've had to get a lot more content driven,
Hmm.
and not just throw stuff out there like you can in a normal Sunday service
Right.
and it doesn't matter. But we've had to get more content driven and more congruent in the content that we're putting out at every age group.
Yeah, yeah.
It has to make sense, and the reality that we've never had to deal with before, probably less so than every other tradition because we're so experientially based,
Right.
is finally coming to grips and being honest about all of the algorithms and the metrics that YouTube, Facebook, Instagram is sending us back.
Hmm.
So we can see how many people are watching past that 3 seconds, how many people are watching past those 3 minutes, how many people watch the entire service. And so now we're going from people, all I would say the same as what everybody else is saying, is we're having to go from people attending to really trying to gauge our success on people engaging
Right.
and discovering really who was a part of our church and who was just attending because they liked something we were doing, and
Right.
if we changed it they would leave.
Right.
If I don't know if any of that makes sense. I kind of feel
Oh
like I'm
yeah.
talking out
No,
loud here.
absolutely. Because I think one of the things that I really resonate with you, and one of the only bright sides to this whole pandemic has been knowing that no matter what faith tradition you're from, no matter what church you go, what geographic center in the US you are from, if you ask the question, hey, how's your church been doing in quarantine? Every single person has an answer. like we're all going through this together. It may be different
Right.
depending on, geographic location, etc. But the fact that we're all processing through this and trying to figure it out, I think that has brought me a lot of comfort knowing that I'm not the only youth pastor out there trying to figure out how to do youth ministry during a pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Youth pastor in my town that's a really good friend with my son, and he's kind of a mentor to my son, really had a low moment when he had 3 kids show up on a Zoom call,
yeah,
and he had to realize that he had to change some things. So,
yeah,
um, I would say conflict wise for us from a Pentecostal tradition, we actually had this conversation this last week in our staff meeting. We look for those tangible expressions of spontaneous messages,
right,
interpretations, prophetic moments. And I don't even like that language because it sounds strange,
sure,
yeah. But it's biblical, um, is being in person with a worship band going, everybody emotionally charged. There's usually somebody who has an expression,
hmm
and we would point to that and say, man, the spirit is moving. Well,
yeah,
we can't do that now,
yeah,
you know
yeah.
we can't do that now.
And
And
it's almost as if, like, because I agree. I think that preaching into a camera is very different than preaching into, because like I come from an evangelical covenant background, so ours is a very small denomination founded by a bunch of Swedish immigrants. So it comes from a Lutheran line. So you sit there, you listen to the message, and if somebody, it's weird if somebody's just like, preach it, or say it, but
yeah, 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 yeah,
but even in a setting like that, you can see whether or not people are resonating with what you're saying. You can see, you can sense it. So we've had to completely reevaluate what, like you said, like what's engaging, how are we engaging. But I think, TJ, like one of the things that I really have learned throughout this whole thing too is that there needs to be so much more reliance on the Holy Spirit and the ability of the
yes,
Holy Spirit to do
yes,
the kingdom.
yeah, yeah. At the end of the day, I mean, I found myself and a couple of our other staff members get caught up in the, man, how many people were watching today?
Right.
How many people were engaged today? Can we do something different? And so there's a phrase in editing. We have a creative guy on staff, and he's kind of become a really good friend of mine. In fact, I met him in my undergrad, and he was 10 years younger than me. And I'm one of the reasons he started coming to our church. Now
Nice.
he's on staff at our church at the creative, and he's helping us film some kids videos and stuff. And he's trying to get my daughter into it, and we're watching a bunch of stuff. But let me give this example, and let me make a statement that
Sure.
I've been trying to make a mantra that I think the American church has failed at, and I don't know if we're learning it now. But so we're watching all of these videos and following these content creators and trying. I mean, we've spent hours watching videos of what these guys do. How can you do this with an iPhone? How can you get this effect?
Right.
What app can you use? Yada 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 yada. But there's one guy that we started following that just makes some great commercials. And when they're asking and picking his brain, he said, "Hey, look, done is better than perfect." And
Mm,
and so that's kind of been our go-to when we film kids stuff, when
yeah.
we film adult stuff, youth stuff. Is, hey man, done is better than perfect,
Yeah.
because you can reach for perfection and never have a finished product.
Yep.
And analysis paralysis sets in.
Mhm.
So the same things are happening just in different ways,
Yep.
and we're facing those same battles. But one of the things, it's weird that now we're in our offices looking to these people who don't have a faith in Christ in any way, shape, or form, almost on purpose, and they're teaching us things about how to reach people.
Mm,
And so one of the things I've been saying to myself is, hey man, sometimes Moses needs to listen to the Jethro.
yeah.
Sometimes we need that Midianite wisdom that's
Yeah.
just not here. Even though we're the people of God, we don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what can we do to best organize ourselves, be honest about who's following us, and preach or give a message that's content driven with congruence that
hmm
keeps people engaged?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right, because I think I would be hard pressed to find a church that has not Googled how to, you know,
yeah,
engage more people. Like
yeah,
it's just
yeah,
a matter of fact of the season we're in, because before, like I'll tell you, for Community Covenant here in Santa Barbara, before this whole thing happened, we didn't know how to live stream. We didn't know how to like engage people on YouTube or look at analytics or anything, but this pandemic sure has taught us a lot about that.
Yeah, yeah, man. Yeah, for real. And I think it was kind of a hidden secret before that we would let non-Christian people teach us things.
Mhm.
And it's really awkward when we're in an office, a very public office, and we're watching these guys' videos and you hear a major curse word or you hear
Right.
a raunchy joke, and
Right.
you just know, okay, well, and it's what we have to do. And then also, I think from the organizational side, we've had to learn to be connected from afar
Mhm.
as leadership,
Mhm.
because three of our staff members, I was one of them, tested positive for COVID, so we couldn't be around people,
Right.
but we still had to do our jobs.
Yeah.
And so in those moments, like one of my leaders filmed a weekly series he does for kids at home, and he had to edit it himself.
Mhm.
Somebody else did this part, and we just got all the videos together. And so we had to learn what is absolutely important and how much fluff we an honest assessment of how much useless fluff we did just to get
Yeah.
a response from the congregation that made us feel good about ourselves.
Yeah, and that's something that has really been challenging me to, like, for youth ministry in particular. Like I want to engage students in a digital space, but I want it to be meaningful. I don't want to just put something out for the sake of putting something out. I don't want to like put out um, just this cheesy content trying to get.
Right, and we do that to make ourselves feel better.
Yes, absolutely, because
Yeah,
those views and those likes, like, great, we're being viewed, we're getting traction, but like for
yeah,
me,
activity makes us feel like we're doing something.
yes, exactly. And for me, that's been the real challenge, because like from like the way I do ministry is in depth, like for instance, the name of our youth group is Illuminate Student Ministries, and our
Hmm.
tagline is brighter, deeper together. And
Hmm.
the idea of this of depth is something that we really, really try to push into with students, of like, you have your digital presence, you have your Instagram feed, you have your Snapchat, but you are a much more complex person than what you put out there. So like
Hmm.
let's deal with what's going on underneath the surface, and let's go through it together. And it's been really, really, really powerful to be able to have those conversations with students. But when this whole thing happened, I almost found myself reverting back to like, oh well, how can I like get them to like this photo, or how can I produce this funny video that they'll share with their friends. So it's been a whirlwind of trying
It's
to
been a
figure.
ride, man. And in all that, having to learn modern innovation, or else, we just become irrelevant and have no space and place. And
Yeah.
I've done a lot of reading. I think the one area I have purposely done is just done a lot of reading on Gen Z and the mind over the last couple of months.
Yep.
Read every article I can find, follow all those things. And I don't really know if the majority of our church leaderships recognizes, the vast differences and challenges that those younger Gen Z kids are going to start presenting in the
Yeah.
next decade or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Oh,
remember.
and or let me balance that out
Yeah.
by also saying, or the amount of resources they can bring into the church
Yes.
if they're
Yes.
allowed, if they're allowed.
If they're given the space for it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, man.
And
It's
I remember that statement right there, though, came alive for me a few months ago, because actually it was several months ago. It was pre-COVID. I remember calling my youth pastor from growing up, because I'm still
mhm.
really good friends with him. Shout out Danny Fiddleson, uh, great guy. I remember calling him.
Danny, we need to talk. I got some questions for you.
um, I called him because there was a certain situation that came up that was new to me, but I knew that he had experienced something similar when he was youth pastor. So I called him and just said, like, "Hey, can we talk?"
Mhm.
And I'll never
Mhm.
forget. He said, "Your job is much more difficult than mine was." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean? We're doing the same job." He's just like, "Youth ministry 15 years ago was simpler than it is now, just because of how complex Gen Z is, like with social media and the presence of online participation and Zooming and all these things. Like, students live far more complicated lives than they did 15 years ago. And
Mhm. Mhm.
Danny was telling me, yeah, the students you're dealing with most likely are dealing with so many more things than the students that I was dealing with were. And in that moment, I realized, like, man, that's true. Gen Z has, I remember reading in an article that Gen Z is the most connected generation, but the loneliest generation.
Yeah.
And I remember that
Yeah.
powerful.
And did you read that? We were in the same class. I think I heard that before, and I don't remember where you said that. And I instantly thought of something else that I read, and that they did a study that this is the most, this is the age group that is the most anxiety, stress,
Yep.
um, what are they, identified, and they're
Yeah.
on some type of medication.
Yeah.
And one of the working theories was that most of those kids are lonely and just don't realize it. And
Yes.
so it causes them, they're lonely and don't realize it, and they don't know how to have fun on their own aside from friends.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing, because like one of the things that social media has done is it's connected students like never before, but those connections aren't authentic in certain ways. And so there's not authentic, but on the other hand too, like if there was drama going on at school, like if you were being bullied, or if there was somebody there that was, gossiping about you, you came home and it was shut off. You could escape that. But now every part of a student's day, they're accessible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a if you log on to Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat or whatever, there's a constant reminder of what awaits you out there.
Yeah. And
um
our generation was technological natives who were consumer driven,
yeah.
and entertainment driven, where this generation is a generation that's digital natives,
Hmm.
right? So, and by that, I know how technology works. Most Gen Z kids, they live more of a life in a digital world, but if something breaks down, they don't know how to reset a
Right.
Wi-Fi router.
Right. Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
not, they're, yeah, yeah. And they're not consumers, though. They're publishers. That's a big statement I've been hearing is,
Yeah.
they're not consumers, they're publishers. And so they have to feel a part of something to take on the beliefs of that system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of corporations are really doing a good job with that,
Hmm.
with so many different little exercises and practices and BuzzFeed quizzes that they take. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's a unique dynamic, and but there's still a lot of good happening.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, that's one of the reasons I have so much hope for Gen Z, because like you were saying earlier, if the church is able to harness just a fraction of the passion that Gen Z has, then we're bound to have some really good years ahead for the kingdom.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's why I work with youth. That's why I love seeing the potential in youth, and speaking to that and saying, like, you want to be a filmmaker? Perfect. How are you going to use that to advance the kingdom? You want to be an accountant? How are you going to advance the kingdom? You
Yeah.
want to be a YouTube streamer? How are you going to use that to advance the kingdom?
Yeah. And bro, Gen Z for our church going digital when all of this hit, they saved us in our
Yeah.
youth ministry, in our kids ministry, in our young adult ministry, even at the church level. That I don't think most of the older generation and even our staff realizes that Gen Z people are really the people that are keeping our technology and streaming side of the church being produced
Yeah.
and watched.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I don't
Well,
even think our product is good that we're putting out, but
hey, but like
but
you said earlier, finished is better than perfect.
that's right. But being around so many big churches that do a good job around here, it's really daunting.
Yeah.
So
But
we have
I
to
mean,
deal with that.
even in that, I want to encourage you, TJ, because like we have our live stream here, and it's not professional by any stretch of the imagination, but I've taken, and at the beginning of this pandemic, I was like, well, how can we look more professional? What do we need? Like lighting or sound? Like what can we do? But
Yes,
then I
yes,
realized we don't have the capabilities that other larger churches do, and that's okay. Like
right.
what people want is they want authentic expressions of faith. And
Hmm.
when we
Hmm.
put a lot of when we put more effort into the production versus the, like you said, the experience, then people are going to be able to tell that it's a fake.
Yep, yep. No doubt, man. No doubt.
So
All right. Is there any other questions?
No, in fact, we've been talking for a good while now, and it's time to wrap up this episode. But TJ, thanks so much for being here. I love talking to you. I love getting the random texts. For those of you who don't know, TJ and I will text back and forth pretty often about comic books and just checking in with one another. TJ, I've appreciated your relationship, man. I love being a fellow servant of Christ with you, and blessings to you and your family and everything that you're doing in your church.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And
I hope this was good and we didn't rabbit trail off. So.
Oh yeah, no, it's great. It's great.
I'm going to point out, I made my daughter. I see the Rocketeer helmet behind you.
Oh yeah.
I made my daughter watch that. That was one of the first movies I watched that as a young teen, older kid. That really, I watched it in the theaters and it really it struck me as awesome.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Found it on Disney Hulu. Made my 19-year-old daughter watch it. She hated it.
Well, when you're young, you have very unwise opinions. So she'll grow into it. But,
I hope so.
Yeah, The Rocketeer is my favorite movie of all time. So
it's a good movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie. So for everybody else watching, thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Thursday's Theology. My name is Pastor Jeff. I've been your host. And remember, theology doesn't always have to be difficult. It is simply the study of your God. Take care. We'll see you later.
We'll see you, bud.